Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at Sevagoth, who dropped with the Call of Tempestarii update today. He's unique in that he has a main form, a shadow form for his exalted, and also exalted shadow claws. Now let's start this off by taking a look at his abilities. His first ability is Reap. This is one of his essential abilities in his kit. His shadow flies forward with a radial aura that damages and debuffs enemy with an effect that increases your damage on them as a multiplier, just like Viral. Enemies that are killed while under the effect of his 1 will be able to charge your soul well, which lets you cast his 4 later on to gain control of its shadow. When you cast this 1 and you aim, it will instead focus the shadow around where you are aiming, prioritizing enemies within your line of sight. This means it can stick around longer and prime new enemies that get within range. His second ability is Sow. Sow is a single cast ability that cannot be recast until it's fully expired. It creates an effect on all enemies within range, dealing true damage per second. Now this is a particularly weak ability and I didn't find much use for it, however you can probably clear normal mode star chart with it. It has a synergy with this one where if you cast it on enemies that have the 2 active, it will increase the damage that the true damage ticks do. In this case you can see it increasing from 555 to 1179 per second. His 1 is also a spammable ability, which can come into use later on for brief respite augur builds. I believe DE's intention for you was to cast the 2 and then cast the 1 to clear enemies and maybe use it multiple times if needed, but as you can see it has no scaling, and you really won't be using this ability much later on, so this is the most likely candidate to be infused over with the helmet system. Now his 3 Gloom is the bread and butter of his entire kit. This is an extremely strong ability that has AoE slow and lifesteal on both weapons and guns to all allies in range. It is an active drain ability that also expands over time like Nova's Molecular Prime. It's hard to mod for because it scales off of all 4 stats. This is currently the highest scaling slow in the game, capping out at 95%, which requires 271 strength. The damage vulnerability that you can cast on your 1 while things are slowed down really lets you ramp up the damage on them. His 4 is his Exalted Shadow ability that lets you go into his shadow mode but requires a full bar that's charged up through kills on enemies afflicted by his 1 or 2. It's an extremely powerful alternate form, as you can see here. I'll get into it in a second. Another way you can access this form is by being dropped to 0 HP, which will instead pull up a coffin just like Inaros, but you will gain control of the shadow instead. During this time, his 2 has greatly increased damage. You cannot use his claws or weapons. Killing 5 enemies with his 2 will allow you to revive yourself. If your shadow dies, or if you're unable to kill 5 enemies before the ring counter on the bottom right runs out, you will truly die, and this will also empty out your soul well bar. So let's take a look at his shadow form and his abilities. His 1 is his Embrace. This is the strongest CC ability he has on his kit and rivals Corazon Snare. Although it is not an AoE sphere, it has an 80% cone slice in front of you and has 20 base meter range. It's a very strong pull, however has a little bit of difficulty re-pulling ragdolled enemies. On the other hand, it does refresh its duration on anything within range even if it fails to pull them. His Shadow's second ability is Consume. Now this is just as questionable as his normal form, however it does have a much higher lifesteal on it, as well as it can be used as a mobility tool. It does innate radiation damage, scaling up from 2500 base, so you'll probably only be using this on the star chart, but it can heal you. His 3 is sort of a mix between his normal forms 1 and 3, where it's a projected aura with an instant range, and it increases the damage vulnerability of anything inside of it. So as you can imagine, combining his 1 and 3 is important on both his normal and shadow forms. As you see here, you can pull things in and ragdoll him with his 1, and then cast his 3 to increase the vulnerability, and then hack and slash away just like a larva ball from Nidus. So how can you piece this all together in a build? Well, first let's look at general play. This is what I decided upon. It's a very balanced build in duration, efficiency, range, and strength because you need a little bit of everything. Of course, the star of the show is his 3 and you can see all the stats are positive, most notably the drain because that gets very taxing. Growing power is here to fuel the slow even higher, getting you up to about an 85% slow when it's active, as well as increasing the damage vulnerability on your 1. It will also increase the damage on his 2, but this isn't really that important outside of normal mode star chart use. Arcane Energize is pretty useful here to deal with the massive drain problems on his 3, otherwise you probably want to drop off Augur Secrets for more efficiency and duration. Now let's take a look at his Shadow build. His Shadow form is restricted to melee attacks and mobility, so we're going to run Swift Momentum so that we can keep up the combo counter on his melee higher, as Neromon and a bunch of other mods do not work on it. Fury and Strike are natural picks to significantly increase the damage on his Exalted Blade, however you can also use it for Arcane Acceleration and Velocity, as his claws do have above 100% crit chance, so you can have these arcanes procced for when you uncast this form. There are also other interesting restrictions on the Shadow. The Gladiator mods do not work at all for your melees, and also the second aura only takes effect while it's active, so no second frame power donation memes for free strength. Once again, range is the most important stat on this build, however not as much as before. Strength is also useful, but you also want a lot of efficiency. Duration we can neglect this time since we don't have a drain cost ability. His 1 is a hard CC pull as you showed. It only has a 5.4 second duration here, but you can always recast it. His 2 is based purely on strength and range, and ignores duration. His 3, which is the damage vulnerability, scales the most importantly off his strength, but you can also always recast it when it expires. Preparation and Prime Flow are pretty useful on this build to cast your abilities, but it is also super important so that if you do happen to die in your normal form, you will instantly have enough energy to spam your 2 multiple times, as Consume is much stronger while you're downed. So let's take this for a spin. I'm gonna go into these enemies, cast my 3 instantly like before, see how slow they're moving now, they're pretty much harmless. And then I can cast my 1, this sets up their damage vulnerability. Now actually watch what happens if I down. So when I'm downed, the 1 actually stays active since it's no longer tied to the ability itself and is actually a debuff on the enemies. So I do get more damage even off of my Consume when that happens to be active. Now let's try to showcase this again with me not being dead. And as you can see, I can very easily walk up to them and just knock them down with my melee and proc a lot of status. They're pretty much harmless. For my guns, it's the same kind of story. You can just take your time priming them up, killing them all off. The important combo here is actually to cast your 3 and then your 1 to weaken them, and so that you can kill them and charge your well. This way you can now cast your 4, instantly switch into it, ragdoll everything, cast your 3, make them vulnerable if it expires, and then just hack away. Basically like a Valkyrie, without any of the drain costs or restrictions tied to it. You even retain full mobility here, being able to hop, double jump, aim glide, and roll all over the place. I'm actually very fond of how intuitive and easy the controls for his Shadow form are. You'll be probably spending a lot of time in this if you prefer melee play, whereas his normal mode favors gunplay. So how about a build for endurance runs instead? It's nothing too special, we're switching over to our Brief Respite setup as always, and then we have our Augur Reach instead of Stretch, as well as Rolling Guard. You'll be using your shield gate to keep yourself alive. We're trying to preserve the same kind of stats, however we did lose a bit of efficiency due to slot compression. So I do think Arcane Energize is extremely important on this endurance build. However, I do expect if you are ready to run endurance, you should have access to this Arcane. So we can take a look at his Gloom again. Now the costs have shot all the way up to 5 to 10 per second. It's more expensive than before, and it explains why I'm worried about the energy economy. Now let's take a look at his Shadow. His Shadow will also be sharing the Brief Respite setup, however this time we actually don't have the Augur mod. I guess you could slot it on top of Stretch, but I don't consider it as important since his Embrace on his 1 is a hard CC and spammable. We've also increased our duration since you probably will be needing that damage vulnerability more on endurance runs or steel path, so you can actually get the most of hacking away and proccing status on your enemies to mow anything too tanky down. As you can see, the efficiency dropped once again, so this streamline here should actually be rank 5, but I just can't fit it on due to polarities. Rolling Guard is important as ever, since we do not have Augur Reach on this build. Once again, Arcane Acceleration and Velocity are pretty handy for if you swap in and out of your 4 often. Now you'll also really want to slot on Decay Dragon Key so that your shields can recharge faster so you can get your shield gate back faster. So let's test this out. Now if I die and I pull out my Shadow, I can instantly roll away to proc Rolling Guard. This way now I can safely set up my dashes to kill 5 enemies off and then get control back of my frame. You'll even have your iframes upon revival. Now you can cast your 3 while you're still invincible to slow everything down and be free to cast your 2 or 1 as needed. Now let's say your shield drop and you're in the open. Well, you can Rolling Guard away just like this, cast an ability to regenerate shields and back off. Remember, your 1 is spammable, so not only can you regenerate shields, but you can also prime them up for damage vulnerability once you come back. If your shields do drop again, just roll again. Once again, here's a demonstration of where I die, and then I just instantly roll as soon as I come out of my shadow so I can set up my 2s. So let's put this all together. Of course, the normal playstyle has not changed one bit, where you cast your 3 and your 1 to prime the enemies, and then use your gun of choice to shred everything. Now if we go on our melee mode, it's still the exact same too. You ragdoll everything, but know you have even higher duration now, which gives you more flexibility on your positioning and safeguard in case things go wrong. Look how long I can just chill here with no threats happening to me. And as soon as they stand back up, I just cast my 1 again. Whenever you want, you can cast your 3 with that increased range and just instantly hack them down. So now we are nearing the end, and I got one last funny little build for you. You may have noticed I named this config a better Slova, and that's exactly what it is. So if you didn't believe me with how busted Sevagoth's slow is, well now I can show you how it works. You can see it has a pretty decent bit of range, and the drain isn't that bad. But what's special about this build is we have growing power slotted on and 244 strength. This is the closest I could get to the cap, and we're currently sitting at 85% slow. If I do proc growing power, I go all the way up to 269, which is very close to the 271 cap for 95% slow. I've infused dispensary on this as well so that we can sustain our energy usage, since Xeneric and other sources of energy such as EV Trinity do not work. Of course, we want as much range as we can possibly fit, and then Arcane Energize to get the most out of our energy orbs, so let's test this out. I'm gonna hop in here, proc my growing power, and cast my 3. Look at how they're literally not even moving at all. There's a full 3, 4, even 5 seconds between a single Gorgon shot. And now I can just cast my dispensary and chill on top of it. Obviously, this isn't that viable for solo play, this is mostly kind of team setup, but this is extremely good for holding tight corners or rooms or even defense objectives. I'm just gonna let this play out and let the build speak for itself. At 60% proc chance with about 61% extra chance of pickup, you only have about a 25 to 30% chance of Arcane Energize not proccing when you camp on top of your dispensary. If it does proc, it's worth pretty much all of the energy you spent in the last 15 seconds. On top of this, you're probably killing the enemies around you from time to time, and because the aura follows you, you won't have to deal with any moving enemies if you choose to travel over to where they were initially frozen. These enemies will also drop more energy orbs, making the build infinitely sustainable. Alright, so now we finally move past all of the frame builds. Now let's take a look at his Shadow Claws. There's only really one type of setup that I'm running here. This build cost me 6 Forma, and it is due to the limitations of Exalted Weapons. You'll see I slotted on Primed Pressure Point here, and Sacrificial Steel. The weapon does manage to pass 100% crit chance, so this is super handy for fueling your slash procs. I also have Prime Reach slotted on, so you can reach 4.5 meters range, as the claws only have base 1.5 meters, making it very difficult to use. Then I have Organ Shatter and your typical modded for Viral, Vicious Frost and Prime Fever Strike, as you can see here. For lower levels, you're just going for absolute raw damage to shred everything out. Carnus Mandible here is to bring up the slash weighting and status a little bit, so I'm more likely to proc slash. If anything lives, then you proc a Viral and knock him up afterwards. If you go the Endurance route, you're gonna draw Prime Fever Strike for Virulent Scourge. I just gotta swap out the builds here. This way you can fix your Viral and Slash weighting, so you're more likely to proc Slash, since it completely ignores elemental damage. And then I can use my Max Strength Berserker here too. So let's see how this build fares. Well, right out of the box with no other buffs and non-scaling crit chance or status, I'd say it's pretty good and respectable for an exalted weapon. But we're not even using Sevagoth's abilities. And once again, look at how sleek and smooth his parkour is. So if we spawn these enemies again, cast this 1 to ragdoll all of them, get them in a bundle, cast the 3 to get them damage vulnerable, and now we start hacking, well, they're all instantly dead. And this barely costs any energy at all. I find this is the most fun way to use Sevagoth, just wreaking havoc with his shadow form. So that's about it and sums up the entire review and build guide that I wanted to showcase to you today. I hope you enjoyed what you saw. If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like or, better yet, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. 74.8% of you are not subscribed. Well, I'll be making sure to cover all the new stuff from Tempestarii from here on out. so you'll want to stick around if you want to see all those tips and tricks. That'll be it for this video. Thank you all for watching, and see you all next time.